Welcome back to Meteorology Matters. Today we're diving into something, pretty close to home for us here in Florida. We're talking about the future of citrus. And, well, the outlook isn't exactly sunny.
It's fascinating how intertwined weather and agriculture really are. The consequences are playing out in a dramatic way, I'd say.
Yeah, that's for sure. It's a lot more than just oranges and a glass of OJ in the morning. This is about the landscape of Florida changing and maybe a glimpse into the future of farming as a whole. But before we get to the problems, maybe we should take a minute and remember just how big Florida citrus used to be.
Oh, absolutely. In its heyday, Florida citrus, well, it was basically the gold standard, right? Back in 1998, we're talking 860,000 acres. That's bigger than some countries. And get this, 244 million boxes of oranges in 1 year. It's easy to see why Florida was, well, it was the orange juice capital of the world.
Wow, talk about a golden age, huh? It's almost hard to imagine how much things have changed.
It's a stark contrast to today now. You're looking at about 275,000 acres for citrus in Florida. And the projections, well, they're pretty grim, frankly. They're only predicting about 12 million boxes of oranges this season. That's a drop of almost 90% from the peak. So the obvious question is, what happened? What went wrong?
All right, well, this is where things get really interesting. You see, we've got two main culprits, and both of them, well, they tie right back into the world of meteorology. First, you've got citrus greening disease. It's a bacterial infection, spreads through insects, and, well, it just wreaks havoc on citrus trees. Production just plummets. It's been a real nightmare for growers.
And if that wasn't bad enough, on top of that, you've got this series of powerful hurricanes that have just slammed into Florida's citrus groves. First, there was Irma back in 2017, then came Ian in 2022, and then, just last year, Hurricane Milton. These storms, they ripped through those grooves, damaging trees that were, well, they're already weakened by that greening disease. It's been a devastating one-two punch.
Yeah, like a double whammy. And to see how serious things really are, you just have to look at what's happening with some of the biggest citrus producers in the state.
Exactly. Take Alico, for example. They're a major player in Florida citrus. They've been supplying oranges to Tropicana for years, but over the past decade, their production has plummeted like 73%. And so they've made the tough call to shut down their Florida citrus operations entirely. It's a huge loss.
And it's not just them, right? This is happening all over Florida. Another grower, been around for a long time, Deep Roots in Florida citrus, they're throwing in the towel too. It's a pretty worrying trend.
And it's not just about the oranges themselves. This is about, livelihoods, people's jobs, entire communities that depend on citrus. The economic hit is massive. This industry used to rake in over almost $7 billion a year, paid like $500 million in state and local taxes. And as that crumbles, the effects ripple outward, impacting the whole state's economy.
So what's being done about all this? Is there any hope left for Florida citrus?
Well, there is some good news. Florida lawmakers are, well, they're finally taking notice, I'd say. They're having serious talks about potential solutions. They're realizing this is a crisis that needs some urgent attention.
That's good to hear. So what kind of solutions are they looking at?
Research is a big one. They're pushing for more funding to support research to fight citrus greening. The goal is to develop citrus varieties that are resistant to the disease, so they can thrive even with that infection hanging over their heads.
I mean, it might seem like a long shot, but it's got to be worth exploring, right?
Absolutely. It's an investment in the future of Florida citrus. But finding a scientific fix for citrus greening, it's only one part of the puzzle. Lawmakers are also looking at the need to promote Florida citrus, boost that consumer demand. They're talking about bigger advertising budgets, reminding folks about, the quality, the heritage of Florida oranges.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's about reminding people what made Florida citrus so special to begin with.
Exactly. And it's encouraging to see people like Florida Senate President Ben Alberton really stepping up on this. He comes from a citrus growing family. He sees this industry as a vital part of of its identity. He even calls it part of Florida's DNA.
Wow. Sounds like he's really dedicated to finding a way forward. But even with all this talk about solutions and lawmakers getting involved, the future of Florida citrus still feels pretty uncertain, doesn't it? What kind of things could get in the way of progress?
Well, you got to think about potential political roadblocks, things that could impact the funding. There's been some tension between lawmakers and the governor over that immigration bill, and that could spill over into, the budget negotiations. The governor has the power to veto specific items, so there's no guarantee that the money for citrus research or advertising will actually make it through.
So even with everyone on board, there's still a chance the resources needed to save the industry won't be there. That's a tough spot to be in.
It really is. But, let's take a step back for a second. Thinking about the bigger picture here. What's happening with Florida citrus? It's not just about oranges. It's like a microcosm of the challenges that agriculture is facing all over the world, all because of our changing climate.
I see what you mean. Citrus greening, it's been devastating, no doubt. But it's just one example of the threats that crops are facing worldwide because of climate change.
Exactly. As global temperatures rise, weather patterns get more and more extreme. We're going to see more plant diseases, more pests. They'll hit more often and they'll hit harder. And of course, more frequent and intense storms, droughts, heat waves, all of which can just decimate crops.
So in a way, what we're seeing in Florida's citrus groves could be a preview of what's coming for agriculture in other parts of the world.
It's a sobering thought, isn't it? It raises some big questions. How are we going to adapt to all of this? How do we make sure there's a future for agriculture, a sustainable one in a world that's being increasingly impacted by climate change? What kind of innovations, what kind of adaptations are we going to need to make?
These are questions that go way beyond just Florida and oranges.
Absolutely. These are questions that demand our attention globally. We need to be thinking about more resilient crops, more efficient irrigation, more sustainable farming practices across the board.
It's a huge task, but one that we can't ignore. And before we go any further, I want to remind all our listeners to follow meteorologist Rob Jones. You can find him on Instagram, meteorologist, TikTok, TV meteorologist, and on YouTube, follow Rob Jones Hurricane, where you'll find the Meteorology Matters playlist. We want you to join the conversation. Let us know what you think about this episode on social media. Use the hashtag Meteorology Matters. Share any ideas or insights you have about the future of agriculture, especially with this changing climate.
It is a massive undertaking, no question. But it's not just about, the science and technology. We also have to think about the social and economic side of this, right? How do we support farmers who are, well, they're bearing the brunt of this climate change? How do we ensure that everyone has access to food, affordable food, nutritious food, even when our traditional ways of farming are being disrupted?
Yeah, those are some tough questions, no easy answers. What do you see as the most pressing concern?
Well, for me, it's the potential for food insecurity. As climate change messes with agricultural production, we're probably going to see food prices go up, shortages, especially in communities that are already struggling, and this could make existing inequalities even worse. Could even lead to social unrest.
That's a scary thought. What can we do to lessen those risks?
One crucial step is to, put more resources into agricultural research and development. We need to figure out how to make crops more resilient to climate change, develop new farming techniques, ones that conserve water, reduce those greenhouse gas emissions, and we need to improve food storage and distribution systems.
Sounds like a pretty monumental task. Are there any promising innovations out there on the horizon?
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of exciting stuff happening in areas like vertical farming, precision agriculture, and people are working on drought-tolerant crops, disease-resistant crops. And we're also seeing more and more interest in regenerative agriculture, focusing on restoring soil health, biodiversity, all that.
These innovations sound promising. But what about us, the consumers? Can we make a difference by the choices we make about the food we eat?
You bet. Consumer demand is a powerful thing. It can really drive change. By supporting sustainable food, locally sourced food, we can encourage farmers to adopt those more environmentally friendly practices.
So you're saying that what we buy actually makes a difference.
Exactly. Buying organic produce, supporting local farmers markets, reducing food waste, we can all contribute to a more sustainable food system.
That's good to know that we can do something. But let's get back to Florida citrus for a minute. Do you think there's any chance for the industry to bounce back?
It's hard to say for sure, but I think there's hope. We talked earlier about the research being done to fight citrus greening, right? And with the right support, the right investments, the industry might be able to adapt, find a way to thrive, even in this new reality.
What makes you optimistic?
Well, you see the resilience of farmers, their innovation, they're so resourceful, they're constantly adapting to new challenges, and there's a growing awareness among consumers about the importance of supporting local agriculture. I think all of that together, well, it could pave the way for a brighter future for Florida citrus.
I hope we're right. But let's be real here. Citrus greening has hit this industry hard, and climate change is only going to make it harder.
You're not wrong. It won't be easy, but I can't give up hope. The stakes are too high. We have to find ways to preserve this. It's a vital part of Florida's heritage. We need to make sure that future generations can enjoy what we've worked so hard for.
I like your fighting spirit. So what can our listeners do? How can they get involved, support the Florida citrus industry?
Well, they can buy Florida citrus. Whenever possible, it sends a message to the retailers, to the growers that the demand is still there.
That's a good one. What else?
They can also support the research, donate to organizations that are fighting citrus greening, developing those disease-resistant varieties.
Any particular organizations you'd recommend?
Yeah, the Citrus Research and Development Foundation, they're doing some really great work.
I'll make sure to include a link to their website in the show notes. What about political action? Can listeners make a difference by contacting their elected officials?
Absolutely. They can reach out to their representatives, urge them to support policies that promote sustainable agriculture, invest in research and development to tackle those challenges that the citrus industry is up against.
That's a good point. It's important for our voices to be heard, right? So it sounds like there are a lot of ways for our listeners to make a difference, both through, their own choices and by advocating for change on a bigger scale.
You got it. Every little bit helps. And if we work together, well, we can create a more sustainable future, a more resilient future for agriculture, not just in Florida, but around the world.
It's really inspiring to see, the passion, the dedication that people have for Florida citrus, for agriculture in general.
Yeah, it really is heartwarming. It just goes to show that, even when things are tough, there's always hope. There's always that willingness to find solutions.
And speaking of solutions, we've been talking about innovation, adaptation in agriculture, but what about us, the consumers? Are we willing to adapt too?
That's a great question, one that we should all be asking ourselves, I think.
Right. I mean, are we open to being more flexible with what we eat? Maybe, try some new citrus varieties or even different fruits altogether? Are we willing to pay a bit more for produce that's grown sustainably? These are questions we have to wrestle with as we deal with this, complex world of food production, especially with the climate changing.
I couldn't agree more. We can't just be consumers anymore. We have to be conscious consumers. We need to think about the impact of our choices on the environment, on the people who grow our food.
It's about making informed decisions, realizing that our choices, they have consequences.
Exactly. And sometimes those choices might mean, stepping outside our comfort zones a little bit, trying something new. But hey, that's part of the adventure, right?
For sure, it's about expanding our palates, supporting a more sustainable way of growing food.
And who knows, we might even find some new favorites along the way.
Now, before we wrap up this episode of Meteorology Matters, I want to leave our listeners with a thought-provoking question.
I'm all ears.
We've talked about the challenges, the ones facing Florida citrus, and what it means for agriculture as a whole with the climate changing. But what can we learn from this? What can we take away from this story and apply to other parts of our lives?
That's a deep question. I think one of the big takeaways is resilience, adaptability. When we're faced with tough times, we need to be able to bounce back, find new ways to not just survive, but to thrive.
It's about embracing change, not being afraid to question how things are done.
Right. And another thing, collective action. When we work together towards a shared goal, we can do incredible things.
Yeah, it's about realizing that we're all in this together, and that what we do as individuals, it can have a real ripple effect.
And finally, I think this story shows us the importance of hope. Even when things seem, impossible, overwhelming, we can't give up on finding solutions. We have to believe that a better future is possible.
That's a great message of hope to end on. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Meteorology Matters. It's been a really insightful, inspiring conversation.
It was my pleasure. And keep those questions coming, Continue the conversation online. Use that hashtag, Meteorology Matters hashtag. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.